All right, so I see that we have some folks coming in. Welcome everyone again to our fifth day of our fundraising expo, Lunch and Learn Fundraising Expo. We'll just give some time to have some people come on in, and we'll commence in about a minute. All right, so I think we got some good numbers so far, so we can start, and we're a minute out. So welcome everybody to our fourth or fifth day of our Lunch and Learn Fundraising Expo. I know throughout the week I've been getting a lot of engagement through the sessions and also post sessions, so thank you for that. It's great to hear from everybody and understand what's working, what's not, and things like that. So that makes our presentations better. Deborah beat me to it. She's like, Deborah here. So like always, with our past 4 sessions, I'd like to welcome everyone. Just be mindful that this webinar is being recorded. Our webinar is going to have a hard stop at 12:30 today. But as before, we're going to have the same process. Denise Mahon will be presenting for the first 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll have about 15 minutes to have questions and engage in a bit of a networking for members or individuals that are on the call that would like a little bit more. In saying that, I would like to welcome you to our fourth day, which is Community Gaming Grant Program with Denise Mahon, Manager of Policy and Community Outreach of the BC Gaming. Denise has graciously provided her time to present about the community gamings for this year and next year. And I just want to make sure before I forget, for folks that are on the line, please feel free to utilize your toolbar below. The Q&A icon is at the bottom. Please feel free to ask questions via that channel. And you can also click on the chat button, and please feel free to provide me with your name or your hospice that you're representing and what you're hoping to gather from today's webinar. Hopefully between Denise and I will be able to answer or address those questions. So who's here? Just want to see who's here. So Deborah, hi, welcome. Oh, please keep in mind, if you do want to use the chat with Zoom webinar, it automatically populates all panelists. So if you want it to be panelists and attendees, please feel free to click on that drop arrow and change the perspective on who you'd like the information to go to. Julian Shannon, I have to learn how to say her name, because those two, bless their soul, from Oceanside, they attend every event. Thank you. I will learn how to say your name. Megan Gross from Powell River Hospice. We are looking for more information about how we can work with the Community Gaming Grant Program to access funding in the future. Gail Potter's here from Greater Trail Hospice. Marge is here from Greater Trail Hospice as well. We have Elena Robinson, ED at Sunshine Coast. Excited to learn lots of insight and tips. Tarni from Pacific Rim, Katie from Sunshine Coast, Jane from Comox. Already. So it looks like everybody just wants to hear what you have to say, Denise. So over to you.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you for that and the introduction. As mentioned, my name is Denise, and I'm the Manager of Policy and Community Outreach with the Community Gaming Grants branch. I am pretty new to the team, actually. I just started with everyone in September. So I've very quickly gotten up to speed, but hopefully I'll be able to provide some information that's useful to everyone today. And if there's anything, we'll have a question and answer at the end, obviously. And if there's anything I can answer, I'm more than happy to follow up offline. I'm also here to help if there's questions that come up along the way. We'll have our contact information information at the end. You're always welcome to reach out to me if there's anything that we didn't cover and you want to know a little bit more about. That's what I'm here for. So let's get started. Typically, when we do these acknowledgements of traditional land, we're all located in the same location physically, but that's obviously a bit different in these times. So I'll be talking about the traditional land that I am currently on. So I'm in Victoria, which is the unceded Coast Salish territories of the Lekwungen people, which are known today as the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. And so I'd just like to invite everyone to think about where they're currently viewing the presentation from and acknowledging the traditional lands that they are on with gratitude. Okay, so I'm going to just do a little quick overview of what I hope to cover in the next little bit here. Obviously, I'm going to talk a bit about the Community Gaming Grants Program, which it sounds like a lot of you are familiar with, so I won't spend too much time going into detail on that, but we will touch on it a bit. I'll also talk about kind of what this sector's programming looks like in relation to our program and what is some of the programming that we help cover and some of the costs that we help cover. Then I'm going to talk a bit about our current grant year. Specifically, I want to talk to some of the COVID-19 response measures that we've put in place this year, just recognizing the disruption and challenges that everyone's kind of facing right now. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about our next year's grant year, in particular our guidelines that we're working on at the moment. And then I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about some topics in a little bit greater detail, specifically our capital project grant program, in-kind contributions, and funding increases, as these might be some avenues that folks might find useful in terms of ways that they might be able to access more funding from our program. And then at the end, we're going to have a Q&A like we talked about. So let's get started. So the Community Gaming Grants overview, our program is $140 million annually that we give out. The bulk of this is through our Community Gaming Grants program, and that's really to help not-for-profits with their costs to deliver ongoing programming. We also have a $5 million separate capital project grant program. And this again is to help not-for-profits, but it's more specific to capital projects or acquisitions. And all of this is funded through commercial gambling revenue. I think that most people are probably quite familiar with our core kind of gaming, community gaming grant program, but maybe not as much is known about the capital project program. So I'll spend a bit of time talking about this a little bit later on, as this might be something that could be helpful for organizations who may have some larger capital program or projects or acquisitions that they're looking to get some funding assistance with. So I wanted to talk a bit about some common programming that we see for organizations in this sector, just to kind of talk a little bit more specifically about how our grant tends to kind of interface with your organization. So a lot of the programs that we get applications for support for funding for are grief and bereavement programs, palliative care programs, hospice and community support programs. So that's really the bulk of it. All of these programs are typically delivered free of charge, and they're open to the public. So family members, other members in the community, that's really what our program is all about. In order to be eligible for funding from our program, there needs to be accessibility and inclusivity across the board, and that's really what we kind of champion. The grants, so how can our funding support your programs in specific? So a lot of our grant funding is used to cover like wages for counselors and other program staff. We also can cover training for volunteers for your organization, as well as program and administrative supplies. And another thing that we can help with is prorated operational costs that are directly attributed to the cost of running that program. So this could be things like rent or utilities, and as I said, staff wages, but you could have a staff member that's not specifically working on one program, but they may be split amongst a couple of other programs. So Some examples of how this would work is, say you have a staff member who works on an approved program that we fund 70% of the time, and the other 30% of the time they're working on maybe other programs or sort of just core organizational duties. You could apply for coverage of 70% of that person's wages as part of your program costs. Another example is, say you have a 10-room space that you rent. 2 of those rooms are directly just for delivering the program, and the other rooms are for, you know, your office space, or maybe they're rooms for residents or something like that. You could apply for 20% of the cost of your rent and utilities toward the cost of running your program. We do cover sort of a variety of different costs, and the main requirement is that they have to be directly attributed to the cost of delivering that program. That's kind of the bottom line, but within that, there are several different things that we can provide funding for your programs. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to the current grant year that we are in, the 2020-2021 grant year. It's a bit of a mouthful. So, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious to everyone the biggest factor over the last 9 months has been COVID-19. The not-for-profit sector in BC and largely around the world has really pivoted very quickly to continue providing essential services to British Columbians, including many vulnerable people who are really particularly affected by what's going on right now. And just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you to all of you for the work that you do and have done and will continue to do to make sure that your community members are supported. And you know, your dedication and perseverance through this really challenging time is greatly appreciated. So our kudos to you for sure. I know that this sector in particular has been hit especially hard. Not only is volunteering, fundraising down, programming has been affected, but also families have lost loved ones to COVID-19, and the need for your services is probably greater than ever. So we definitely recognize that uniquely this sector has faced some challenges that are quite specific. We've definitely heard across the board from organizations how the challenges that COVID-19 has faced for their organizations. Cash flow, we know, has been an issue with volunteering. Donations are down. Programming is on pause, so revenues aren't coming in. And so we know that having access to liquid funds was definitely important and was becoming a challenge. So in response to what we heard in the early spring, we put in a number of changes to our program to adapt our policies and our processes, just to make sure that we were addressing the immediate impacts on the sector. So we were able to relax or adapt some of our program criteria, and that was to allow us to give everyone some flexibility and to make sure that organizations continued to be eligible to receive funding. So I'll just run through what some of those are. We opened the human and social services sector early, which all of you would fall into. And we did that just knowing the need that was coming out of the pandemic, and that a lot of organizations who would be directly assisting that kind of needed to have access to funding a bit sooner to be able to respond. So we opened that one up earlier than normal. We relaxed our requirement to provide recent annual general meeting minutes. Especially at the outset, it was really hard for people to come together and hold their AGMs. It's a bit different now, but nevertheless, we relaxed that requirement and didn't require organizations to be providing that to us if they couldn't. We also relaxed the operating surplus criteria of an organization's finances for return applicants. So, you know, as I mentioned, cash flow is an issue. Organizations weren't able to run their programs, and they may have had an influx of government aid that was coming in that was available. So we weren't holding folks to having a certain surplus limit for their organizations. And similarly, we relaxed the program financial eligibility criteria for programs. So as you may know, we have a 75% limit on programs in terms of the government funding portion that's allocated to it. And for the same reason, knowing that volunteer hours were down, donations were down, this would kind of throw that a little bit out of whack. So we've relaxed that as well. We've also relaxed the 12-month program delivery requirement. So for organizations that have had to pause their programming, we weren't enforcing that 12-month continuous previous delivery of the program. We also relaxed that for new programs that were responding to COVID-19 related needs. So that's kind of the bulk of the things that we've done. We worked to communicate those changes on our website and set up a COVID-19 frequently asked questions. And we updated our application itself, which some of you may have seen, where there's a section where we ask folks to tell us how they're adapting their programs and how that complies with the public health orders, just so we can all be assured that we're doing the right things in terms of what Dr. Bonnie Henry has asked us to do. We're still in our current 2020-2021 grant year. These COVID-19 measures are still in place. Excuse me. We know we're not out of the woods yet, obviously. And I'll talk a bit about what the work we're doing in terms of planning for next year in a moment. So as of November 30th, all of our sector intakes are now closed. So our grant year is kind of done up in terms of the applications coming in, but we are continuing to assess the applications that we have and providing notifications to organizations along the way. So if you haven't heard anything back from us and you have an application in, it's coming. So just hang tight.
Denise, I do have a question.
Sure.
For Blita. I know that we had mentioned about having the Q&A at the end, but just so that we can keep some engagement, and because I do have this one question that I think might need to be addressed here.
Okay.
It says here, hoping for answers regarding monies from a government grant that are restricted to building, which isn't happening in short term. It makes it look, so this hospital looks like they have a lot of funds in the bank, but this funding has to actually be returned because of restricted funding. Okay. So because of the amount, they're having challenges in getting gaming grant. They're turned down due to that. Is that something that you're going to probably be addressing in any of your, or has that come up?
Well, I mean, in general, we do allow organizations to have restricted funds, whether they've internally restricted them. So that would be something like they've got a surplus and they want to start putting it towards, say, a project. Their board votes on it. That's all good as long as we can see that that's been done purposefully. Mm-hmm. There's also externally restricted funds. So that would be like grant funds that are given from another entity that are reserved for a specific purpose. And we don't hold that against anyone in normal times, nor would we be doing that right now. So basically, if you do have funds that are set aside for a particular purpose, as long as we can see, the source of that funding, whether that's through your own generated revenue or that's an external grant, so we know where the funding's coming from, what it's meant for, and that we can see, some documentation in terms of a decision that's been made to hang on to that for future years. That's all good. We do have a sort of a time limit for that internally restricted funds in our guidelines. So I think it's 3 years that we say that folks can internally restrict, and then after that point, we kind of consider them kind of like rainy day funds because the project hasn't come to fruition. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we wouldn't normally penalize people for that. We certainly wouldn't be doing that now. So if that doesn't answer the question, I would say reach out to me by email and we can look into that a little bit further because there may be some other circumstances that are at play here. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Okay, so I'll just jump to our next year's grant year. We have been busy preparing our annual update to the 2021 guidelines. As you all know, our grant year does tend to open early in the new year, typically February 1st. So we're still tracking toward that. As usual, the updates to the guidelines are really meant to continuously improve our program. Policy changes are gathered throughout the year from input that we receive from our stakeholders, from applicants, and from the staff ourselves. All of these are meant to just improve upon our program and respond to whatever is kind of going on out in the world. We definitely recognize the coming year is going to look different than normal, not unlike what we're currently dealing with. COVID-19 is still very much a going concern. And we know that not-for-profits are still feeling those impacts. So we've been looking at the guidelines with this in mind, and we're trying to figure out what this is going to look like. We don't have answers on all of that yet. As you all are probably aware, we had an election and our minister changed over. So we're in the process of bringing our minister up to speed on our program and running through some of the recommendations that we do have. So we hope to have a bit more information on that soon. And as always, we will try to get the published guidelines out as soon as possible. This sector opens up a little bit later than the rest, so you do have that, that time in between, I guess, that you'll be able to have quite a bit of time with our guidelines, but I know that people still want to know sooner than later kind of what that's going to look like, and that'll help them plan things. And so all I can say for that right now is kind of stay tuned, and we'll aim to have the information out as soon as we possibly can. Okay, so I'm going to get into some of these topics now. The first one is the capital project grant, which I spoke a little bit about earlier. So some of you might not be as familiar with this program. It hasn't been around for as long as our main community gaming grant program. 2020 is in fact our 4th year of the program. And as I mentioned earlier, the objective of this capital project grant is to help not-for-profits to complete capital projects that will provide significant benefit to their communities. And this grant is specifically for capital projects, and those projects need to have a cost that's the total cost of the project, I should say, between $20,000 and $1.25 million. We are quite strict on that in terms of it not being below that or not being above that amount. And the reason is that, you know, this type of a project is really what is kind of in scope for what a not-for-profit would be able to accomplish. So we're not looking to fund mega projects or multi-year projects. It's really what would be, you know, as we were kind of talking about before, restricting those funds. What could a not-for-profit be able to save up for and ask for some funding assistance with to complete a total project in a reasonable amount of time? The sectors for our main capital or community gaming grant program apply here. So if you're applying under the human and social services sector, you would also be applying under the human and social services sector as a capital project grant. And the eligibility criteria for organizations is the same as the community gaming grant. So there's nothing different that you have to demonstrate to be eligible for this grant in that way. We provide between 20 to 50% of the total cost of the project, and we provide a grant up to a maximum of $250,000. So say you had a project that was 1.25 million, we can provide up to 250,000. So that would essentially work out to be 20% of the total cost of your project. So that's kind of how that shakes out. Matching funds from the applicant organization are required for this program. And these must be on hand at the time of applying. So we will accept a bona fide, I guess, promise or a commitment from whoever you're getting the additional funding from. But having the funding on hand at the time of application is definitely a stronger case for an application. Successful applicants will get what they have asked for. So if you tell us that your project costs $500,000, we're not going to kind of nickel and dime. If you're able to demonstrate that that's what it costs and this is what you need to fulfill it, we will assist you with the amount that you asked for. And the one main difference for this program compared to our regular community gaming grant program is that it is a competitive process. So applicants are really encouraged to put forward their best application, knowing that others are doing the same thing. So for this year, our application intake was from June 19th to August 14th, and we haven't released the notifications yet for this year, but we're aiming to do that before the end of the year. So typically our intake does happen over the summer period. So we don't have dates for what that will look like next year, but if you are thinking about this program, that's kind of something to keep in the back of your head. Organizations can only submit one application per year for one project. So we are looking for one complete and total project. We're not looking to fund phases of projects or cascading projects. It's one complete and total project. There should only be one lead in the application or project. Organizations can work together, but we do need to have kind of one sole entity that is responsible for everything to do with the project and has kind of that sole responsibility at the end of the day. Organizations can still apply for your community gaming grants as usual. We considered these projects or programs rather separate from one another. And like our guidelines for our main program, the Capital Projects Grant has its own sector guides or guidelines. So that has a bit more information that's specific to this in particular, because obviously the requirements for this program are a bit different than our main program. And that gets updated every year as well. So similar to our main program in terms of having program eligibility criteria, the Capital Project Grant has project criteria. Generally speaking, for across each of the different sort of buckets or categories, the project must be for the community benefit and be accessible to the public after it's completed. And the organization must have the right to build or modify land, and that needs to be shown through proof of ownership or lease or some kind of permission, and that would be more applicable to those building related projects rather than an acquisition. As I mentioned, there's only one grant application per applicant and only one project per grant. So an organization could apply in any one of these three categories, but they couldn't kind of have a bunch of few. So what I mean by that is, say an organization had a whole suite of restoration activities that they wanted to complete, but they couldn't also apply for, say, acquiring a vehicle. It kind of has to be in one of these buckets and one of these buckets only. And as I mentioned, this is so that we can ensure that there will be a completed project at the end of this. What we wouldn't want to see is a bunch of half-completed projects. So it's really that organization needs to pick what they want to accomplish from one of these categories, which I'll talk about in a sec. And that's where they're going to put their efforts toward. Lovely. Did you have a question? You popped up.
Yes, I did.
Sure.
You see my head alert. So we do have a question. Eligibility for capital grants. Our member said, my understanding is that if you apply for improvements to a building, the building must be owned by us. However, many of us have hospice rooms and other care facilities. Are these exceptions to this eligibility criteria?
I would have to probably look into that. Like as I say, ownership is definitely the easiest route, but if you have lease or you have permission from whoever might be granting that or who's got the authority to grant that, we do allow that as well. I don't know about, say, if there was a government funded facility, that kind of gets into a different area, I think. But what I would say is maybe we can have that conversation offline, and I can look into that a little bit more and provide that information back, because I'm not too sure how it works, because similar to our community gaming grants program, government funded programs or organizations is not something that we do, because that would kind of be not double dipping, but we're kind of having government on government funding. So, and this program is really about that not-for-profit. So I would just have to make sure that it's not getting into that zone.
Okay, great question. Yeah, and that would be definitely something, once you do have that, Denise, feel free to send it to me, because I think it's a great question for many of our members,
Sure.
for sure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
for sure. Okay. Okay, so I'll just run through the different project categories that we have. So the first is facilities. So that would be constructing new facilities, restoring or maintaining existing facilities. And this would be in the case that you own the property, you've got a lease, or you've got some permission from whoever is the holder. So that would be to purchase new or used buildings, build new facilities, or do renovations on existing facilities. The community infrastructure is really about that, the development of public amenities. So these are typically tend to be kind of outdoor structures, but playgrounds, community spaces, skate parks, things like that fall under this category. Acquisitions is really to do with the purchase of fixed capital assets that are for long-term ownership and use by the applicant organization. So we tend to see a lot of applications for vehicles, computer equipment or IT equipment, sports equipment, things like that would fall under that category. It's important to note that we don't fund research or development, so we're really looking at those hard assets, those tangible things that you can touch and feel and see. And as I mentioned, this grant is awarded by a competitive assessment process. We have different things that we assess as part of that, like community benefit or project feasibility. I won't go into great detail here on what all of those are, but if you're interested in learning more about it, our sector guidelines has more information, and you can find that through our website. Okay, so that is that, and I'll move on to in-kind contributions now. So organizations, as you might know, can include in-kind support or contributions as part of their program financials. It's a great way to show community support and investment, but these contributions are also a really good way to show greater program revenue and expenses, and can be helped to support a request for more funding. It can also help if organizations are finding that government funding is making up a large portion of their program revenues. And as you know, and I mentioned earlier, our program does set a limit of, we're up to 75% of a program's funding can come from government sources. So that in-kind support can be used to contribute toward the remaining 25% of the program's operating costs. And this can really help groups that don't have a lot of other funding sources available. In-kind support can include a contribution of volunteer time, donated labor, equipment, services, and materials. And the way that we value this, the volunteerism and donations, is kind of by this standard. So for donated materials, they're valued at verified fair market value. For donated accredited professional services, so say something like an accountant, that's also valued at verified fair market value. And then for other volunteering of a general nature, we value that at up to $20 per hour. And it's important to note that that valuation is really just specific to our program, just for the purposes of calculating that in-kind support, and it's not necessarily something that you should be using elsewhere. It's just really specific to our program. And the information on your program's in-kind support must be shown on our in-kind contribution summary, which you may be familiar with, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. So why do we need this in-kind contribution summary? In short, it helps us to determine what are actually eligible program costs. So if an organization does include volunteer labor or donated materials, we need to make sure that those are actually eligible costs toward the program. And really what that means is that they're not for the organization's costs, but they really are directly attributed to the program costs. So for example, volunteer hours for attending board meetings or committee meetings, writing grants, or working on other programs would not be eligible as part of the in-kind contribution summary. It's always about the direct delivery of that program. So on the screen here, I have an example of what an in-kind contribution summary looks like, and this can be found on our website. So an organization would fill out one of these for the previous fiscal year and would be submitted along with their other financials, which also covers the previous fiscal year. So those would all kind of line up together in terms of what did it cost to run your program last year. So like the program financials, this is all backwards looking. As you know, our program is based off of what was done last year. So we don't need to see a summary for what you're proposing to do going forward. It's all about what did you do in the last 12 months to run your program. So there's more information on this available on our website and in our guidelines if you're looking to get a little more detailed, but hopefully that's a little bit something for now if that's something you want to pursue looking into a bit further. So I'll get to the last topic, the funding increases. So requesting increases is definitely a common question that we get from organizations. So you know your organization is growing, you're serving more people, your expenses are going up. What's the best way to ask for more assistance from our program to support your programs? So you know, grants are not provided for future expansion. As I just mentioned, our program is really looking at what did it cost to run your program in the last 12 months, and that's what we base our funding off of. So organizations must demonstrate that past growth, not for projected future growth. And that growth must be sustained by the organization for a minimum of 12 months before we can consider funding it. So if you say, I want to hire a new staff member and that's going to allow us to provide 30% more services next year, you know, that's great, but we really need to see that evidence before we can provide funding toward it and what that actually costs. So general advice for requesting an increase. Past growth may be funded if funds are available, and that's a big caveat. You know, if everybody is seeing a increase in demand and our funding is limited, we have the same amount to work with every year. It really has to fit within kind of the confines of the funding that we have available. Funding may be provided if the increase or the expansion was for eligible costs. So you may have increased your program, but if it isn't anything kind of to do with what we would be able to fund, then we can't really help with that. And if a need for increased funds has been demonstrated, so we do need to see that evidence and that demonstrated demand on your program. And I'll talk a bit about more how you show that in a second. And another piece of advice is to ask for an increase that's in line with how your program has grown and what you need to sustain your program. So if your program has increased, say, 10% since last year, you would request an increase that's in line with that. I mean, it wouldn't make sense to increase something that's kind of over and above that and out of proportion. So keep it proportional to what your growth has actually been like. A request for an increase without that supporting information is not going to be successful. And as I said, we'll talk about how you show that in a moment. And the last thing I'll say is that if you do want to request an increase, it needs to be done through our regular form application. Some folks are allowed to use the renewed funding application, but that just assumes that everything is status quo. So if you're asking for an increase, that's obviously not status quo, so it would need to go through the regular form application in order to do so. Okay, so there's two places that we want to see that program growth demonstrated. The first is in the program description. It's really the opportunity of the applicant to tell us how much more you've been doing in your own words and demonstrate that need for additional funding. And so here's where you would really want to do your best to highlight the program and the past growth that you've experienced. So some ways that you could do that through the description is by providing us with statistics. Hard numbers are always really convincing. So you could tell us how many more people you've served, how many more workshops or classes or services that you've served as a result. You could explain how your costs have increased. So which programs have increased, why have they increased? This would also be corroborated with your financials, which I'll talk about in a second. But this is kind of your opportunity to tell us through words what that increases look like for you. You could tell us how your community support and participation, what that looks like. So do you have lots of demand, and how do you know you have that demand? Is there wait lists? Are there people emailing you? How is that kind of shown up for the programming that you do? And then you can describe how your program has grown and what you've needed to do to support that growth. So have you created new positions? Have you had to offer up new spaces or new components of your programs? Really just tell us with your words in a clear way how that growth has shown up for you guys and what you've needed to do in order to be able to offer that programming to people. And if you have had growth that's kind of been sustained over several years, being able to kind of show that year over year is really going to tell that story and have everything line up so that when the analyst is reviewing your application, they're going to see every year this program continues to get stronger and grow, and they need an increase in funding to support that growth. So the other part about showing that growth is through the program revenue and expense statements. So the program growth should be shown in the description, but also it should be shown in how your finances have shown up. So if your expenses have gone up as a result, that should be reflected in your financials, because obviously it costs more to run the program if there's more people or you're doing more offerings. And as well, if there's any revenues that are coming in as a result of your programming, then that would obviously go up as well. So the analyst taking a look at your file will look at the financials that you've submitted with your application. They'll also take a look at what's happened historically, how much funding have you had historically, and if there's been that sustained kind of growth year over year, they'll be able to see that on a comparative basis. And as I said, it really just demonstrates that kind of upward trajectory. So this information is really vital to show how in the past 12 months your expenses have grown to support your programming, and any revenues that you've generated as a result. So the program description and the financials kind of go hand in hand to be able to tell that story of how your program has grown and how you need increased funding in order to sustain it at the level that it's now at. Okay, so that is that. I will leave some of these resources up on this page here. So this is how you can get a hold of us and get more information. There's our main website. We have a general email inbox that you can submit questions to. We've also got a phone line, and there's somebody who answers the phones every day. My email is up there as well. If you want to get in touch with me and ask more specific questions, generally the sort of general email is about maybe more simple questions, but if you want someone to kind of look into, say, a notification letter that you got or provide some advice that's specific, that's when you would be reaching out to the outreach inbox and myself, and we have a policy analyst named Jillian. We monitor that inbox and can give you some assistance that way as well. I also provided the link for the Gaming Policy and Enforcement branch if that's anything that might be relevant to you, if you do raffles or tickets or things like that, and you need to get in touch with them. As well, the website for the BC Association of Charitable Gaming and Community Gaming, Charitable Gaming Associations, you can connect with them as well. And they do get some funding from us to help organizations with their applications or ask questions, and they're able to kind of offer a bit more direct support and advice. Obviously, we can't tell you what to put in your application, where we have to be impartial and provide the same level of service to everyone, but the BCACG and the community charitable gaming associations can help dig into your application and be able to provide that assistance to help you hopefully be successful if you do want to ask for more funding and things like that. So I would direct you toward them as well. And I think now we can get into questions.
Yeah.
As I kind of mentioned earlier, you know, before we dive into things, I know people probably want to know what next year is going to look like. As I mentioned, we just got a new minister. We're bringing the minister up to speed. That's Minister Josie Osborne, for those of you who don't know. We're very excited to have her join us. But we're working really hard to kind of get her up to speed, put her recommendations in front of her, and have a little bit of clarity on what next year looks like for us, which at the moment we don't necessarily have. So hopefully, you know, we'll be able to communicate that information out as soon as we have it, and that is something that we always strive to do regardless. So so yeah, I think I'll leave it at that, and we'll see what questions folks have.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Denise. That was awesome. Your presentation definitely did generate some questions. So I'm just going to start with Elena. I have a question regarding funding levels. So this was a little bit prior, a little bit earlier in your presentation. Local or regional granting. We serve the Southern Sunshine Coast, and residents must use a ferry to access healthcare services off the coast. We are the only hospice with beds and services serving our region. Would we be considered a regional organization for our program delivery level?
So the way that the local, regional, provincial is determined is through kind of the size and the scope of what you provide. And when it comes to regional or provincial organizations, what we tend to kind of need to see is that you are the only entity who's offering that service in either that region or the province. Otherwise, you know, you couldn't really have several regional entities who are offering the same thing. Like, you need to kind of be the go-to. So if that's the case for you, through same as requesting a funding increase, that would need to be demonstrated through your program description and through your financials in terms of telling us the size and the scope and the nature of what you do and how that fits that regional criteria, if that is in fact what you're aiming to get funding at that level for.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. Thank you. The next question is from Maria. To demonstrate that we need additional staff member, we have to show that we have had an additional person on board for the previous 12 months. We have had a person, but they were a volunteer, and now they are about to retire. Would that qualify, a volunteer filling that position? Or if we can demonstrate that donations have covered the cost of that position?
I mean, if assuming that that person that is retiring will be held on to as another staff person in the next year, we do allow funding to sort of convert a volunteer to a paid position. So I would say in principle, yes. But again, that would need to be kind of shown through your financials and your program description and what you're requesting the funds for. So if, you know, for example, you have asked for funding at a certain level, and then you're basically in your next application, you're requesting the same plus the cost of that new person, you would describe what the use of that funds was for and how you could demonstrate that person has been with you, and now you're converting that to a paid position in your now application.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer the question? There may have been a second part that I may have missed.
No, I think from our end,
Okay.
we've answered it. Maria, please feel free to add more if we had missed anything. So we have a question from Gretchen. Can a region be as small as a regional district with several district communities?
I don't know that I have enough information to answer that. I think my understanding of how analysts determine local versus regional versus provincial is kind of how I had stated. If they are that sort of entity for that area, that region, we don't necessarily define it by other types of regional markings. It is a little bit loose in the definition. So it's not like, oh, if you're you are this regional health authority, it doesn't go by those kind of geographical borders necessarily. So it is a bit of a loose definition, but if you can demonstrate that you are the regional go-to that covers, you know, a wide area and serves many people in that area, then I think that you know, that's sufficient. I'm not sure if I can be more specific than that without actually seeing the information in front of me, unfortunately.
Mhm, mhm. The other question is, if the previous year's gaming grant has not been used or used in full due to COVID, even though you have allowed 24 months to use it instead of 12 months, would an organization still be eligible to apply for this year? Or I guess
Yeah,
next year, 2021?
yes, yeah, for sure. What I think I would advise is that what you apply for next year, if you do have funds that you're sitting on and you are given that additional 12 months for this current grant year, is that what you apply for next year, you know, you want to be able to spend that funding. You wouldn't want to sit on a bunch of gaming funds that aren't being used. So you know, you don't necessarily have to ask for the same amount of funding either. You can ask for less if you know that you're going to be delivering less funding, or you have a bunch of funding that can help kind of backfill. You can ask for the funding amount that you think is appropriate to deliver your programs in the next year. So yeah, definitely apply. I would just say think about what you'll be able to deliver and what you need from us to in order to do so.
Mhm. So I think there's two parts to this question, even though it's two different people asked them, but in different areas. So COVID has closed some casinos and presumably reducing the pool of gaming funds available. Will this result in a reduction of funds available across all sectors? Are some sectors given preference over the others for overall funding available? And then there's a third part. The third part,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. I'll answer the first two first. So
Yeah.
yes, casinos are closed. We do know that online gambling has increased, but definitely the levels will not be what they're currently at. However, our program funding is not tied to what the sort of general pot of gaming funds is in the year. So we're kind of operating under status quo. We haven't been told anything otherwise, that our funding level will stay the same. So that's what I know, and that's what we'll continue to hope for. We know that the government hasn't or won't be coming out with their budget until a bit later than usual. Usually that's in February, but now it looks a bit later. So we're kind of in the waiting room like everybody else to figure out what everything's going to look like across the board. But as I say, we haven't been told anything differently, so we're going to continue to operate on that assumption. But in terms of the priority of different sectors over others, no, not at all. Our program is very much driven by the demand that people are coming to us for. Like before, you know, if you are eligible for a grant, you will continue to be eligible for a grant, and it's all kind of self-identified. So if an organization comes to us asking for help and they meet the criteria, they will get some funding. So we won't be prioritizing or turning different folks away. It's all based on community-driven need. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
Well, that's great to hear. So what I'm hearing you say is that $130 million annually looks like it's full steam ahead, possibly for the next year. Would that influence capital as well, or is that the same premise for the capital grant?
Well, our whole envelope is 140. It was originally 135, and then 4 years ago, we're given an additional 5 million to run the capital projects grant. So it's the same thing. You know, we think that we'll have the same funding. We don't know otherwise, and we won't know for some time, but we're gonna forge ahead under that assumption. And you know, I think if there were any changes, it's going to be across the board, but we literally have no idea, and we're all very hopeful because I think, you know, it's very clear that the value of what not-for-profits do in terms of helping communities. So you know, I think we're all very hopeful that we'll still get the same level of support.
Yeah. Well, yes, obviously, yeah, because the nonprofit community is very important. I always say the nonprofit community is what the public sector does not want to do because there's no money in it, and what the government and the public sector can't do because of the local connections that nonprofits make.
Yeah, I think, you know,
So
it's very
very
reasonable
important.
to say, you know, it's an extension of what the public sector wants to be able
Exactly.
to do, and so we want to be able to continue supporting that, because if that support isn't there, those
Right.
things might go away, right? So
Exactly. No, that's great. Well, Denise, that was a lot of questions. Do we have any more questions? Don't be shy. No, I think we're good. Denise, thank you so much
you're
for taking
welcome.
some time. And I know even I'm going to be very blunt, on a provincial level, your group has been amazing in
Oh,
working
thank
with
you.
us. Between yourself and Amy, I send an email about, a hospice this or a situation here, like within 24 to 48 hours, you guys are back in terms of connecting with us. So that really shows us that um, your team really understands the importance of hospice within our communities, but also
Hmm.
it's great. It's great to know that we'll get a response if
For sure,
we
always.
contact your office for sure. So I
Yeah,
certainly
we're
appreciate
here
that.
to help.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you again for
Great.
being our fourth day. I know everybody's probably zoomed out and tired of my voice, but this was a fantastic presentation. Thank you, everyone that took the time to dial in. And Denise, thank you again for taking some time and
Thank you for having me,
presenting
and thank you
today.
to everyone who came to watch and ask questions.
Exactly. All right. Sounds good. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone. Take
All
care.
right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.